அந்த வகையிலே இந்த விவரம் உங்களுக்கு மீண்டும் ஒரு முறை எங்களுடைய வழிகளை தாங்கிச் செல்வதாக இருக்கும். இந்த வகையிலே இந்த மாநாட்டை ஒருங்கிணைந்து நடத்தி இன்று 2வது நாள் நிகழ்விலே இருக்கின்ற இம்மாநாட்டை ஒன்றிணைந்து நடத்திய 7 கனடாவில் இருக்கக்கூடிய 7 தமிழ் அமைப்புகளுக்கும் இந்த அமைப்பு குழு சார்பாகவும் இங்கே வந்திருப்போர் சார்பாகவும் மீண்டும் ஒரு முறை நன்றியை சொல்லி இந்த இதிலே ஒன்றிணைந்திருக்கின்ற அமைப்புகளாக.
So the organizing committees of the Second International Tamil Conference consists of Brampton Tamil Association, National Council of Canadian Tamils, Mississauga Tamil Association, Ottawa Tamil Association, Quebec Tamil Development Association, Tamil Canadian Civil Society Forum, and the Transnational Government of Tamilam Canada. It is crucial that the efforts and commitment of all these organizations are extremely integral to this conference and reflects the strength and unity of the Tamil community. So can we have a round of applause for all these organizations? And with that, the Tamil diaspora has come together to organize an international Tamil conference in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada. Throughout this conference, we'll be focusing on 5 different yet related themes. The first theme is Sinhala Buddhist ethno-nationalism and its consequences. The second theme is a genocide by another name. The third theme is human rights violations and the search for justice. And the fourth theme is rebuilding a nation in today's geopolitical context. And last but not least, the fifth theme is a way forward to freedom and justice. Okay, now without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Richard Mann. Professor Richard Mann is from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Carleton University, Ottawa. Professor Richard Mann is the Associate Professor and Associate Dean and has published a book called The Rise of Mahasena, The Transformation of Skanda Kartikeya in North India from the Kusana to Gupta Empires. He has also published articles in reference journals such as the Journal of Religious Studies and Theology. We now welcome to the stage Professor Richard Mann.
அனைவருக்கும் மீண்டும் ஒரு முக்கியமான அறிவித்தல். உங்களுடைய கைத்தொலைபேசிகளை ஓப் பண்ணி வைத்து இந்த மாநாட்டு நிலைக்கு ஒத்துழைக்குமாறும் அனைவரும் அமைதியாக இந்த மாநாட்டு மண்டபத்திலே முழு நாள் நிகழ்வுகளை இருந்து ஊக்கமளிக்குமாறும் இந்த மாநாட்டு குழு சார்பாகவும் மீண்டும் முறை வேண்டிக் கொள்கிறோம். நன்றி.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here to speak to you today. I would like to thank some of the people I have worked with, Warren in particular, who has done a wonderful job first coming into the Dean's office to ask for our help and also helping to organize things and make things clear. So thank you, Warren. You've been a great help. And it's been a real privilege to be here. So without further ado, why don't I read my paper, which hopefully won't go too long, but time will tell. This essay argues that the Sri Lankan government's constructed definitions of Tamils as quote-unquote terrorists, separatists, and anti-national is an attempt to disguise state violence against the Tamil community in Sri Lanka as anti-terrorists as opposed to state-generated violence better called genocide. This state-generated label, I argue, is designed to enforce majority Sinhalese control over the government in Sri Lanka and to allow the ruling elite to maintain power. This state-based violence is more, I argue, than a human rights violation, but with Professor Bowles' convincing argument yesterday, it was genocide. Such an argument raises the vexed question of how to define genocide, which Professor Bowl handled very well yesterday, thank you. So that means we get to skip part of my paper, and that's good news for everybody. So I don't need to go over the definitions of genocide, because yesterday Dr. Ball did that for us in a manner that is much more convincing than I could have. But the other question I wish to raise in this paper is why the Western media avoids any reference to this term in the nearly 1,000, well, to be precise, 999, newspaper articles on Sri Lanka that I have read from a variety of Western newspapers from Canada, the United States, Australia, England, and New Zealand. Central to my argument in this paper is that the way the Sinhalese Sri Lankan government of Kumaratunga and others disguised their atrocities and genocides of Tamils was to frame Tamils as terrorists attempting to destroy a democratic nation-state. These claims of democracy and terrorism are, I will argue, ways of framing the rulership of Kumaratunga as positive, liberal, and progressive, and ways of framing the Tamil community as terrorists and anti-national. There is, however, a significant gap between this framing of these notions and the reality of what happened in Sri Lanka that is best defined as genocide perpetuated by a corrupt and undemocratic government. Much of the control and dissemination of information that the Sri Lankan government was able to manipulate was facilitated through their control over media, both in Sri Lanka and internationally. As we learned yesterday in Nir Manusam's excellent paper, during the states of emergency declared by the Sri Lankan government and at other times, the Sri Lankan government controlled Sri Lankan media, as did they censor and edit the stories produced by outside journalists working in Sri Lanka. As has been argued by a variety of scholars, the media are a primary means of generating interpretations of groups, events, and ideas, as well as a sense of national identity and the dissemination of national agendas. As such, the control the Sri Lankan government had over Sri Lankan media and the resulting ability to control the dissemination of information to media outlets overseas gave them the power to frame both themselves and Tamils in ways that allowed for genocide to occur without significant international criticism of the Sri Lankan government for generating these mass atrocities, largely because they framed Tamils as terrorists, particularly after 9/11. Before I present some specific examples of this media framing and how Western media outlets accepted it uncritically, I will briefly discuss the theory of media framing as it has been developed by Robert Entman. Media framing can be the conscious or unconscious choice of newspaper editors and journalists to highlight certain aspects of a narrative so that certain conclusions result in the readership. Framing essentially works through selection and salience. In other words, choices made by editors and journalists as to what will make the news, how it is presented, and the repetition of such frames has a significant impact on how the media audience understand and react to reports. Another way of understanding Entman's theory is that if you continually see the headline that reads Tamil terrorist, it becomes ingrained in people's mind. They never see another report. When they do see alternate views or other reports, they question the alternate report because they have been ingrained into this one way of seeing things. So media framing becomes very important in terms of how the broader, let's say, Canadian, Australian, British, and American public understand events in Sri Lanka, because as we'll see, they never actually hear the voices of Tamils. Entman's analysis of media framing stresses that frames often identify what a causal agent has done and the benefit or damage of those actions. The evaluation of the benefit or damage of the causal agents are typically measured by common cultural values. Once Sri Lankan Tamils are framed as terrorists in newspaper outlets and are presented as the causal agents of much of the violence in Sri Lanka, the common cultural values used in media sources often relate to the international war against terror. So it becomes tied with that. So the common cultural value is related to this other broader global campaign after 9/11. And this then gets reinforced with the notion of international media. Hence, the reading public comes to view the violence in the state of Sri Lanka that the Sri Lankan government perpetuates as both legitimate and somehow supported by Western states. Within the Sri Lankan context, where there was no freedom and still is no real freedom of the press, the way to frame Tamils as terrorists attacking a democratic nation state is particularly amplified, particularly after 9/11. This mode of framing Tamils in Western media outlets places them in a category in much of the Western public's mind as legitimate targets for state-based violence, as did it lead to governments like the United States of America and others to label the LTTE as terrorist organizations. I am not here arguing that all acts of violence are justified or that something called terrorism does not exist. But with scholars such as Sean Kaplan in his article 3 Prejudices Against Terrorism, a careful and critical examination of the possible moral justifications of the violence perpetuated by so-called terrorists is needed, because without a sense of the context and what has led to that violence, all the label that terrorist does is trigger a red button in people's minds. They will not then look for more context. They will not desire to understand. All they see is the word terrorist, and that sets off a red light in their heads. So with him, that sense of context, what actually happened, what is motivating people to push back against a nation state, becomes the central feature that is not covered in the media for the most part. Once, though, a group is labeled as terrorists, such careful and critical examinations of context and circumstances disappears from the media context, largely because of assumptions around the nature of terrorism and those that carry it out. Hence, once the LTTE are framed as terrorists by the Sri Lankan government, and then this frame is perpetuated in Western media sources, the context of state-based violence in Sri Lanka is either simply ignored or vastly underreported. Much of this framing of the LTTE appears when Chandarika Kumaratunga becomes the president of Sri Lanka. She is framed in media sources, particularly Western media sources, as a democratic leader seeking peace through negotiations with the Tamil people. The reality of the violence perpetuated by the Sri Lankan government against Tamils is rarely presented in such reports. There are occasional references to discrimination against Tamils and occasional accounts of state-based violence against Tamils, but once again, such accounts are likely dismissed by a readership that has already accepted the framing of Tamils as quote-unquote terrorists. During Kumaratunga's rule, her voice and view of Tamils dominates Western media sources. We never hear the voice of Tamils unless they are presented as advocating for violence against the state. When Kumaratunga what Kumaratunga says matters within the context of media framing, because the media tends to report primarily on what people in positions of power do and say. In other words, we hear an awful lot about what President Trump does and says, what Prime Minister Trudeau does and says. Well, that sells newspapers or gets people to click on your website. So it's not that uncommon that the main voice is often a president or prime minister, but that's also often been the bias of the media. They are only interested in hearing that particular voice. So hence the ability to frame one's own character and those of others is often in the hands of presidents, prime ministers, and others in positions of power on the world stage. In many of the Western newspaper reports of Kumaratunga, she is presented as a peace negotiator who will bring about an end to ethnic violence in Sri Lanka. She is often framed in a positive manner. But after she is nearly assassinated by a suicide bomber, and then after 9/11, the framing shifts. We read, for instance, the following quotation from her while in hospital after an attempt on her life. Quote, "Let all those who aid and abet terror be warned. Let those who secretly or openly condone the path of violence pursued by the cowards of the LTTE be warned. The days of terror in this land are numbered," and that number is small. So that appeared in December 23 in 1999 in a newspaper called the Sydney Morning Herald. It also appears in about 15 other newspapers, Canadian newspapers, American newspapers, other Australian newspapers. So this was a widely circulated piece. What I want you to notice is that terror keeps showing up, and that's not accidental. She is trying to frame Tamils as terrorists, and that then becomes the lens that Western governments and the Western media start to see Sri Lanka through. There was also a series of newspaper stories in America, in American, Canadian, Australian, and English newspapers, with Kumaratunga blaming the Tigers for trying to kill her and engage in terrorist activities. The New York Times, for instance, not long after the attempted assassination of Kumaratunga, presents the following article with the headline, quote, "Injured Sri Lankan leader urges Tamils to help end terrorism." We are told in this article that Kumaratunga states that, quote, "The Tamil people must clearly and without hesitation decide whether they are going to continue to strengthen the hand of terror and murder by their secret, silent, or partial support of the LTTE," end quote. Well, actually not end quote. Ms. Kumaratunga said in English during a 5-minute radio and television address to the country. Now, end quote. Much of this framing of a supposed democratic leader who had nearly been assassinated by supposed terrorists is also accepted by political leaders in the West, such as the following quotation from Bill Clinton. He is quoted as publicly stating, "It is particularly distressing to me that these heinous acts have occurred during a democratic election campaign," end quote. The nature of the Sri Lankan democracy has been rightly critiqued by scholars such as Neil Devota, and what is also clear from Clinton's comments is that the framing of Sri Lankan politics as presented by Kumaratunga and then through the press, in other words, that the struggle in Sri Lanka is between a democratic nation and a terrorist group, has been accepted and reinforced by Western media sources and also then by Western media political leaders. In other words, it's one thing for the newspaper to make the claim. It is then another thing for the President of America to get up and make the same claim. It just reinforces the frame over and over again. After 9/11, the framing becomes much worse of Tamils as terrorists. And it becomes a much stronger presence in media reports on Sri Lanka around the world. In an edition of The Australian, for instance, we read the following. Quote, "Sri Lankan President Chandrika Kumaratunga, in a rare broadside against Tamil Tiger rebels." I find that very ironic, a rare broadside. That largely infers that they have no sense of the context in Sri Lanka. Anyway, against Tamil Tiger rebels says, "There is evidence linking the guerrillas to the assassination of Foreign Minister Lakshman Chandirgamar." Mr. Chandirgamar was gunned down on Friday night at his home in the capital, Colombo. He was a vocal critic of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam and played a key role in the group's prescription as a terrorist organization in several countries, including the US. Mr. Chandirgamar was an idealist, so this is a quotation from the president, was an idealist long before September 11th and the London bombings, long before terrorism became an anathema in the Western world. He spoke out against terrorism in Sri Lanka and abroad, Ms. Kumaratunga said. He was instrumental in having the LTT recognized internationally for what they are, an armed terrorist group, end quote. Once this frame of a democratic country fighting a terrorist group has been established in Western media sources, this frame comes to dominate most Western newspaper reports of Sri Lanka, with Tamils repeatedly presented as terrorists fighting a legitimate democratic government. After 9/11, one mostly reads accounts of violence on the part of Tamils in Sri Lanka, almost always presented as terrorist attacks. One rarely reads about the violence of the state against Tamils. With this frame established, we read accounts such as the following in Western media sources. On this night, she, that is Kumaratunga, tells the people of Vayangoda, is that close? Okay. That peace is at hand. Now, we all know that this is just not true, but again, because the media presents it, people will not question it. The government forces are now entering the final phase of defeating the terrorism of the LTTE, she says. Almost 75% of the land and the Tamil civilian population have been liberated from the grip of the tigers. But the war will not be a complete solution. We must address the genuine and legitimate grievances of the people. What I hope you see here is how media framing works. They are terrorists. I am going to help them because I'm some sort of a just democratic ruler. Well, we all know that is just not true. But that's the only voice that ever appears in the media presenting these claims. So what we see here then is a framing of Kumaratunga as conducting a quote-unquote legitimate war, and that she has genuine concerns from the Tamil people. We know that this is not the case, but the reading public has no means of reaching an alternate conclusion than the one they have been provided by the media. There are, to be fair to the media, occasional references to Sinhalese discrimination of Tamils, but any context or accurate account of what the Sinhalese state has done or is doing to Tamils in Sri Lanka is never carefully explored in these media sources, nor do they ever directly speak with Tamils, as far as I can see anyway in the 999 articles I have read. Rather, an image is created of a radical extremist group trying to terrorize a nation and its people, and hence the violence of the state becomes, at least in the eyes of the West in the fight against terrorism, justified acts of violence in the war against terrorism. Hence, by framing Tamils as a terrorist threat to a democratic state, the Sri Lankan government is able to disguise its genocide of Tamils as a fight against terrorism. So that's why media framing matters. You never ever see the word genocide in any of these reports, even though we now know that is the correct term. All we see is the word terrorism, and that a prime minister is somehow fighting some sort of a just war. Now, in fairness to the Western media, there are references to state-based atrocities against the Tamil community in some newspapers. Once in a blue moon, the Globe and Mail does that, and so does the Star. One of the London newspapers occasionally will make reference to this, but never with the voice of a Tamil. So you never actually hear what has actually happened. There are vague references to atrocities, but always as the next step in an article that started with the word terrorism. So for the reading public, are the atrocities those of the terrorists, or is it state-based atrocities? Is never made that clear in the articles. So it's not that they never say there is no state-based violence, but often that state-based violence has already reflected the frame of terrorism, and for the reading public who knows nothing about what is actually happening in Sri Lanka, how they read that word atrocity is not clear at all. We would have to do some sort of psychological test in a large group to actually figure out how it got read. So, yes, some of this is assumption on my part. We do have also occasional references to government-sponsored death squads in some media sources. Again, some. This is a tiny number of the 999 articles I have, so I would estimate somewhere between 2 and 3% make side references to these points. But such references are never given any context and may well be dismissed by a readership that is rarely given a Tamil perspective on what the government is doing in Sri Lanka. Hence, when a Western reader with little understanding of what is and what was actually going on in Sri Lanka reads reports of terrorist violence in Sri Lanka and then also reads comments about atrocities in Sri Lanka, the probable assumption on the part of the reader is to assume that such atrocities are conducted by terrorists and not by the state. To conclude, I am not arguing that the media are not a source of meaningful information. Far from it, the example of Sri Lanka highlights the need for a free press. So one way the press could have covered Sri Lanka was to have reporters in the field gathering evidence and publishing that evidence. That they were not permitted into the field, and the only source of information they had was essentially from the Sri Lankan government. That's how this framing takes shape. For instance, if images of the genocide of Tamils in Sri Lanka had circulated in Western media sources, the perception of the Tamil Tigers in the West would have likely have been much different. Here I'm thinking of the images of Syria, of people carrying corpses of children around. That has an impact on most of my colleagues here at the university, that they can't believe that this has been allowed to go on in Syria. People need that context to see what is actually happening, as opposed to the way the Syrian government frames it, that they are going against terrorists, not trying to control and seize power. My concern with the case of Sri Lanka is similar to that of the first keynote speaker then, in that states like Syria, India, and Kashmir, and others have learned how to conduct violence against their own people by framing those in opposition to them as terrorists. In other words, it is both a Sri Lankan issue and problem, but one that the rest of the world seems to also mimic, to realize that there are ways of carrying out genocides and hiding it by claiming that the people you are killing are somehow deserving of death. So I don't have it here with me, but there is a quotation from the then Prime Minister where she says, "It is justified to kill the killers," is her claim. And that was circulated in nearly 20 Western newspaper sources, the Times, a whole series of other newspapers. And no reporter ever questions that. It is just presented as a quotation without commentary, thought, or other view presented. So again, it's not that I think the media is not useful or doesn't have the potential to be useful, but only if the media is permitted to be free and have access to things. The other issue with the media at the time when most of these newspaper reports were coming out, particularly in the 80s and early 90s, was there have been a number of studies of Canadian and American media outlets that were more or less staffed by white North Americans. The absence of minority populations as reporters or as deliverers of the news had a significant impact on how things got framed. Other people do bad things, and we have to stop other people from doing bad things. There has been a shift, at least in Canadian media sources, to try to, the CBC, for instance, has tried to indigenize parts of its media outlets. We see more minority groups represented in media, and it has shifted the way groups get framed in media sources in quite a positive way. Thank you. Now perhaps there is time for questions, quandaries, quibbles, moments of quiet disillusionment that you would like to express.
I think you hit the nail on the head correctly. That the government of Sri Lanka hired a well-potential, which is a notorious image organization, which supported many world leaders who were committing genocide.
Ah.
And the equation they created was camels equals tigers equals terrorists.
Yeah.
And I think they succeeded in that image of the three words, and that kept repeated again and again. As a result, if you notice, no other person other than Tamils participated in any of our struggles in Canada.
Yeah.
We had tens of thousands of people on the streets. We had 30,000 people for almost a month in Ottawa in front of the parliament, but nobody bothered to come. Not even the MPs, except for 2 people came out. The reason was the government succeeded in framing this as a fight against terrorists, so if you are Tamil, then you're a terrorist.
Yeah, and I think it's that inability of both our own governments and our own media to question the frame they have been presented. Part of the danger is that word terrorist will sell newspapers. Good news does not sell newspapers unless it's sports or music. Bad news does sell newspapers. So there had been, at least in media sources, a tendency to stress the bad news, because that was how you got people to buy your newspaper. Now that newspapers don't exist that much anymore, they're somewhat more liberal, but yeah, I agree.
So in your mind, what can we do to overcome this?
I think part of that we've already heard from the student panel and the documentary we saw today is there are now ways to present your narrative and your story, both through the documentary, which is able to sort of touch other nerves that people will understand and comprehend in a way that just hearing someone like me say things will not necessarily touch that same sense. In other words, it's an alternate frame and a powerful frame, which is what makes it useful. And then the use of other media sources to present the case. I think that's what becomes a very useful way of changing the narrative and the frame, that there are ways of convincing the current media outlets to see a different picture. Other questions, queries, comments, quibbles? Someone must have a quibble.
considered unbecoming of you as a foreign minister to behave in this manner. Then coming to Chandrika, my friend too, when she became the, I congratulated her. And later when things went changed over, many things that happened. First letter when I wrote to her, she thanked me. Second letter when I wrote to her, second letter I wrote to her, there was no reply. When I met her in person and said, how do you conduct yourself? She put a smile and said, well, that's politics. Thank you.
Any other, perhaps very quick questions?
This is a very quick question. You were mentioning about powerful people have to be take a side and inform about the diaspora. This is what. What I am thinking is, do you think that Canadian Prime Minister or American President can help us on this matter?
I don't know. I don't speak for them, but I think asking is where you begin. Presenting the case is partly where you begin. So I think that's part of it is don't give up trying. I think is an essential sort of message that in the past, when you looked at the government of Stephen Harper and others, no, they were not sympathetic. That word terrorism clicked a button in their heads and they simply would not engage, as far as I'm aware, with the community or the issue. There are slightly different leaders now, but whether or not they are prepared to listen or how they might act remains sort of an open question. But I think it would be a mistake not to try.
I think we lack a word here. Those who commit terrorism are called terrorists, but those who commit genocide, we don't have a word to describe that.
We call them presidents or prime ministers, I'm afraid. So it is, because they sort of carry that stature, and the way the media frames leaders is often through that stature, unless they can find a way to present them in a very negative light. So often that framing is also around your own national identity. So American framing of situations in Syria, for instance, is often quite sympathetic to the Syrian people, largely because the sense of American national identity views the leadership in Syria as a potentially bad group, potentially. So there are other ways of looking at these things as well. But should you have any quibbles, I'm always open to quibbles. You can catch up with me at lunch or coffee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Richard Mann. Before we proceed to the next sessions for the day, I'd just like to address a few housekeeping items. I know many people may have some questions throughout the talks and also at the end. So if you do have any questions or comments, we kindly ask that you please raise your hands. We have our volunteers at each side, and they will bring you a slip of paper, and you're welcome to write your questions, and they will collect the slip of paper and bring it to the speaker. So we kindly ask that you follow this process when you have any questions. Also, we ask that you please be mindful and kindly switch off any electronics or mobile devices during the sessions. Please note that only registered media are permitted to take any photography or videography at the conference, and we will have recorded speeches and discussions on our conference website as soon as the conference is over. In addition, we do have NLA Express, who will be live streaming this event, as well as holding interviews outside the lobby area throughout the day. So you may let loved ones know that they will be able to watch the speakers from home. If you are interested in talking to us, you may also come to meet us outside in the lobby. Outside, you will also see an exhibit displaying artwork, photographs, and books relating to the theme of today's conference being provided by Canadian Tamil Youth Alliance. We would also like to inform you that we have provided you all a program souvenir that consists of event details, the program for the 2 days of the conference, and the bios of all speakers. Now, without further delay, I think we can now begin in today's conference on Tamil nationhood and genocide in Sri Lanka, a search for justice and post-war rebuilding of the Tamil nation. It gives me great honor to invite the first chair of session 5 to carry the conference forward, Mr. Nirmanasan Balasundaram. Nirmanasan Balasundaram is a journalist, human rights defender, and independent researcher in peace building and conflict resolution. Nirma holds a master's in peace and conflict studies. He has frequently engaged with international stakeholders, including diplomats, civil society members, journalists, politicians, and policymakers in Geneva, Brussels, Washington, D.C., and London on issues surrounding human rights, mass atrocities, justice, and accountability in Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Nirmanasan Balasundaram.
Thank you all. Good morning to you all. Anevarikkum Kaalai Vanakkam. I hope everyone had a good rest and refreshed after eye-opening presentation in the morning or the keynote address. So I think we are running behind more than an hour. So we'll try to catch up. All right, so the session 5, Rebuilding the Tamil Nation in today's geopolitical context. I think the title itself, sending a strong message to the people who try to reimage the Tamil nation as a minority group. I think that's the power of this title. And without further delay, I would like to call the speakers. But first, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Darsha Jagadiswaran, who is going to talk the military in civilian life, implications for identity and community. As we are talking about or discussing about the genocide and its impact on the Tamil community, I think the militarization is playing a crucial role in the Tamil genocide. I think militarization, single colonization, and single archaeological sites and special economic zones are interrelated in the part of eliminating the Tamil nation's existence in the northeast of the island. So Darsha is going to focus on the military in civilian life. Darsha is a Tamil Canadian lawyer who, after being called to the bar in the province of Ontario in June 2016, has been based in Jaffna since August 2016, helping set up the Adayalam Center for Policy Research. While at Adayalam, Darsha has written multiple reports and briefs on security sector reform and proposed transitional justice legislation, as well as running multiple capacity building programs. Darsha holds a junior doctor from the University of Toronto, Faculty of Law, and BSc from the McMaster University. Darsha's research interests lie in accountability, justice, and security sector reform. Darsha is online? So, as I mentioned already, Darsha is based in Jaffna, and she's going to talk to us over Skype from Jaffna.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nirman, for that lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay. So I'm going to focus my presentation and talk today on something that I know has already been touched on earlier in the conference, both by Mario Arodas and also by the keynote speaker. And that topic is militarization. But I'm going to be focusing on it from a slightly different angle. So I'm going to be looking at what a question that has been on my mind for the last 2 years, having worked in Jaffna and traveled across the Northeast, which is what are the long-term impacts of militarization and securitization on Tamil national identity and Tamil political aspirations, particularly those that are centered on self-determination and nationhood. So before I get started, I just want to go through a couple terms that I'll be using and how I personally define them. So the first is what I mean by militarization. The definition that I prefer to use is that of academic Cynthia Unlow, who defines it as the step-by-step process by which something becomes controlled by, dependent on, or derives its value from the military. And I think, I won't go into too much detail about this because I know it's already been discussed. But in the 9 years since the war ended in Sri Lanka, I think rather than decrease the levels of militarization in the Northeast, what we've actually seen is an increase in the role of the military in civilian lives across the country, across the Northeast, but particularly in the Vanni region. And I think this is where it's important not to just look at militarization on a numerical level, because yes, the military has slightly decreased in size since the end of the war. I think at last count, we're looking at about 240,000 troops. But when we talk about militarization, it's not just about their physical presence, it's also the ways in which they're embedded in civilian lives, ranging from employment to education. So one example is with regards to the Civil Security Department, which employs over 3,500, mostly former LTT cadres and war-affected women in Kilinochchi and Mullaitivu alone. You also have education, right, where the military is involved in preschools, but also in sports ceremonies and award ceremonies. And so they've become a very critical part of everyday life across the Northeast. And the short-term impact of this has been really well documented, and I think it's already been discussed at this conference with regards to the ongoing human rights violations, the repression of economic growth, as well as some of the suppression of civic and political engagement. And these issues are all covered in reports we did last year, one between Adayalam and Pearl, and the other on the Civil Security Department by Adayalam. The other term that I'm going to refer to is securitization. So I think oftentimes we talk about militarization, but don't give enough attention to securitization. And securitization is the process by which the Tamil population is painted out to be an existential threat to the Sri Lankan state. So I think, this at times can be seen in the so-called regrouping of the LTT that the Sri Lankan government always cites around special days such as Mavidanal or May 18th, or even right before the local government elections. It can also be seen in the way that the diaspora is painted out to be this sort of extremist, war-hungry kind of beast. And I think Dr. Madhuraka Rasaratnam has written in her book, Tamils in the Nation, quote, "After the war, the diaspora has replaced the LTTE as the malevolent new force of Tamil nationalism, threatening Sinhala Buddhist order and therefore terrorist by definition." And so I think what I think is important to premise my talk on then is that these two processes, securitization and militarization, are mutually reinforcing processes. The Sri Lankan state points to the fact that the Tamil population is prone, in their view, is always prone to violence, is always prone to regrouping as a justification for the military's presence in the Northeast. And then because the military is so present in the Northeast, they create these scenarios in which it is easy to securitize the Tamil population, such as the Ava gang, which again, we've written about quite extensively in a brief that we published in November 2016 that talks about the fact that this so-called gang violence in Jaffna is very much linked to military intelligence and has to be deeply interrogated in terms of the motives and modus operandi of it. So now kind of coming back to the question that I'd like to focus on today. what is the impact, the long-term impact potentially of militarization and securitization on questions of self-determination and nationhood? A common refrain I've heard from individuals across the Northeast over the last 2 years goes something like, "We can't trust anyone in our village, Akka. I heard that that man, a neighbor, is an informant for the military, and apparently that woman, another neighbor, has been seen with intelligence at her house." And war-affected Tamil communities I've encountered between 2016 and 2018 across all 8 districts of the Northeast have issued these sort of complaints about their own communities. They all share this perception that there are these vast, deep intelligence networks comprising not just the obvious kind of external security forces, but also their own. So whether in places of open resistance, such as protests of families of the disappeared, or in people's own homes, Tamils in the Northeast just don't feel safe or beyond the reach of the Sri Lankan state's omnipresent ear. Following the war's conclusion, and so we have to ask ourselves, we have to, I think, look at, well, what are the reasons for this fear, and what is promoting this perception that within our communities, there can't be trust, there can't be cohesiveness. And I think to do that, you have to look at, well, how did the war conclude and what happened after the war ended? And following the war's conclusion, the entire Tamil community was subjected to the military's physical presence, but also, more importantly, the intelligence network. And so Ambika Satkunanathan writes that the impact of this was what she calls the mobilization of fear through the creation of a widespread belief of this sort of extensive surveillance mechanism throughout the North, which enabled the military to control the population even without the physical presence of a military in uniform there. And I think with regard to this, it's important to revisit something Gotabaya Rajapaksa said in 2013 in Sinhala during a rally in the South, which is that the end goal was to turn the Northeast into an open air prison, which means that the military wouldn't have to be there, but that we would police ourselves. And it's not just about people who are affiliated to the LTT or people who are seen as anti the military. There's also a very broad fear of being anti-Sri Lankan state. And that definition really broadened in kind of the last phase of the conflict in the post-2009 era under the Rajapaksas to mean anything that challenged the state order. So whether that was human rights investigations, human rights activists, or whether it was political mobilization around Tamil national identity, I think that, you know, the understanding of what it was to be anti-Sri Lankan state was seen as extremely broad. And as many of us noted in the years following the end of the war and during the end of the war, arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, rape, killings took place against really anyone who was part of that expansive broad definition, which at points in time really just amounted to being Tamil. And so again, coming back to this question of, well, how did this fear really embed itself within the communities? And how did communities sort of lose that intra-community trust and cohesiveness? Again, we have to turn back to the methods employed by the military during the last phase of the war. As Roger McGinty and others have studied, one of the strategies that the military used during the last phase of the conflict, post-2005, was something called social network analysis. And basically, social network analysis is a counter-insurgency strategy which involves mapping out social dynamics and relational links within a community, and then using the analysis to identify important nodes and hubs within the community that were viewed as targets. The destruction of those hubs or those nodes would mean destruction of the social network, which all analysts attributed as necessary to insurgency. And I think to drive that point home, between December 2005 and December 2007, as many in the room probably remember, human rights NGOs reported, and these were conservative estimates, that 1,500 people had been disappeared in that 2-year period alone when the ceasefire was breaking down. One of the primary ways in which the military identified people to disappear and identified people to target was through the defection of Karuna as well. And again, I think this is really important to understand because it comes back to how the Tamil community perceives others within the Tamil community. But following Karuna's defection from the LTT, the military made use of many of the cadres in Karuna's unit to point out other LTT cadres and to identify people who were influential and people who were important nodes within that network. And I think most recently this has been highlighted by a report that ITJP has put out on the Special Task Force, which again has testimony from Special Task Force officers referencing the use of Karuna's cadres. In addition, post-2009, a number of former LTT cadres who were surrendered or captured during that period were forced to point out other cadres and forced to point out other activists within the displacement camps, but also long after the war had ended. So one of the former cadres I've interviewed told me that he'd be asked to stand on the side of the road and nod if someone had walked by that was a former cadre in his village. And he was at such a loss as to what to do because he couldn't not do it because the military was threatening his family, but he also didn't want to point anyone out. So he just kind of randomly nodded. And so I think what's really important to understand from that is post-2009, the fear that took place and was rooted in communities wasn't just fear of the security forces, it became fear of your fellow villagers. Another example was last year, I'm sure some of you have read the Stories of Resilience project that we've been doing. Recently, we launched a series called Stories of Vahare, which are stories that have been taken largely from the Vahare region and parts of rural Batiklo. So last year we tried to set up an interview in a village in rural Batiklo, and it was through a university student who we are well acquainted with, and it was in his village. So he had gone and spoken to the former cadre the day before and to arrange the interview, and had confirmed everything. But the following day, the former cadre had received a phone call, or sorry, that evening itself, the former cadre had received a phone call from CID asking, why are you speaking to this organization called Adeyalam? What do they want? What are you going to say? So we canceled the interview because we didn't want to put him at further risk. But the only people that had been in the room when he went to go speak to him was the university student, the former cadre, and then the former cadre's brother-in-law. And so the kind of intelligence networks and the perception of distrust and fear comes down to even the familial level. And I think that these levels of suspicion and distrust are even further elevated in communities where the military has also pursued aggressive campaigns to employ former LTT cadres and Tamil women, because then they're subsequently perceived to be too close, to the military and working for the military. And I think a really good example of that is communities in which a large number of people are employed by the Ministry of Defense-run Civil Security Department. I keep coming back to the Civil Security Department because, to me, it's a symbol of what exactly we need to be concerned about in the long run when it comes to dampening the grassroots community's calls for Tamil national identity and self-determination. The CSD, for those who haven't read the report yet, was originally was the National Home Guard Service, which I'm sure many are familiar with. The National Home Guard Service themselves were complicit in many of the atrocity crimes that occurred during the war, and in fact, there was one National Home Guard person who was part of the Kumarapuram massacre, about which me and Mario wrote a report for Pearl on last year as well. So the Home Guard Service was turned into the CSD in 2006 by a gazette that was directed by then Secretary of Defense Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And up until 2009, the CSD was very much a counterinsurgency functioning unit. So it went into areas that had been where they had removed the LTT to make sure that there was no resurgence of the LTT and to make sure that people there didn't rise up again. And while many former LTT cadres and women didn't want to join the CSD at first when they came into their communities in 2012 and 2013, eventually many did, because the truth is there are very little economic opportunities available for them there. And the other reason some of them joined was they thought that already to their homes, the CID and security forces were visiting every day. So maybe if they joined, at least they could stop that. And I think the consequences of their joining, I won't go into too much detail, but I encourage you to read the report because it describes in detail how their engagement in civic and political affairs has been really repressed, and also how it's changed the way the communities perceive them and furthered distrust and suspicion within those communities. So I think what I've been discussing thus far really comes back to something that I think I have found really striking and to be true across the Northeast and almost all the communities I visited, with the exception maybe of Iranatipu, which is that intra-community cohesiveness and trust, particularly in areas where there is a heavy military presence and the military is particularly involved in civilian activities, has really broken down. And I think, one of the frameworks that's useful to use to analyze this is something called social capital, which is a sociological framework. And basically, social capital just refers to the features of communities and social organizations like trust, reciprocity, civic engagement that improve the efficiency of those societies and help facilitate coordinated activities. So what does if we accept that intra-community trust and cohesiveness has been negatively impacted by militarization, what does this mean in terms of the Tamil community's political and civic engagement, particularly on a framework which challenges the Sinhala state order and is premised on self-determination and nationhood? I think, again, these are just preliminary theoretical ideas that have come out of research I've done over the last 2 years. But one of the problems with this is when it comes to collective action, right? So problems with collective action occur when there is a difference between the benefit someone can gain from pursuing a course of action that's useful for themselves individually versus something that's useful for the collective. And applying this to the current context in the Northeast, many Tamil individuals are having to choose between working for the military or accepting other pacification measures by the Sri Lankan state, or continuing to support and espouse a Tamil national identity which challenges the Sri Lankan state and organizing and mobilizing for the latter. So as I think you've already heard from my colleague Guruparan, but he argues, and I agree, that the impression is being forcefully created that seeking self-determination is inimical to the very survival of the Tamil community. While on the other hand, the choice of foregoing the Tamil national identity in favor of support for the Sri Lankan state is perceived as providing short-term benefits to the individuals, as it ensures they're not seen as anti-state, not to mention the economic benefits that it can potentially provide to those individuals. So the question then becomes, does a reduction in the kind of social capital within Tamil communities, that cohesiveness, that trust, reduce their willingness to adopt the Tamil national identity and politics in favor of the Tamil national identity? Looking again at the CSD as a case study, there was one woman we interviewed in 2017, and when we originally interviewed her last year, she was able to be critical of the military. She was able to be critical still of Sinhala state parties, despite the fact that she was working for the CSD. Now, I've now interviewed her again about a year later, just under a year later. And in that time period, the military has only increased their involvement in her life. So now she is not only working for the CSD, but she is receiving specialized vocational training, which the CSD is offering everyone in the Kilinochchi and Mullaitivu areas now. And on top of that, she herself has been further isolated from her own community. So she no longer attends the church that she used to go to because others in the church were viewing her quite negatively because she had taken on this sort of specialized training, and they were seeing her as being even further embedded into the military. So when I interviewed her again this time, she could not, even though she did trust me and we had this relationship, she no longer could voice critique of the military. And she could also no longer really voice critique of the Sinhala state either, which I think is, and again, this hypothesis hasn't been tested quantitatively, and I don't want to make conclusions on this, but I think these are things that we need to be worried about and also further understand. Because what this means is in the future, Tamil nationalist political parties in the Northeast may have a harder time politically mobilizing, and it might become easier for some Singla state order aligned parties to make inroads. Some would argue, looking at the January 2018 elections, that some of that is already happening. One journalist basically did a chart analysis where he mapped Tamil nationalist parties, which he identified as the TNA, the TNPF, and the TULF, and how they had done at the 2018 local government elections versus how they had done at the 2015 general elections, and found that there was a 17% drop-off in the vote share that they had. Now, it's not a perfect comparison because it's a different set of elections with a different set of members, and people are much more willing to kind of take risks with voting in the local government elections and vote based on kind of personal affiliation as opposed to party affiliation. But then you look at something like the May Day rally that happened in Jaffna last week, where the JVP shows up. And granted, there's a lot of propaganda being spewed about how, the JVP, it was all locals who participated. They didn't bus anyone in, which I don't think is true. I've already heard reports of at least one bus having been brought in from outside. But nonetheless, they did manage to bring out a significant number of Tamil voters from that area. And so I think that it is something that we need to be concerned about. But that being said, I also agree with Dr. Rasaratnam's view that Tamil national identity is the consequence of outcome of, I'm just going to say it in her words because she can say it much better than I can, but her quote is the outcome of stepwise and temporally continuous processes of organization and mobilization that establish the idea of a Tamil national identity as a dominant and unavoidable presence in the Tamil political life. So basically, if we understand Tamil national identity as the outcome of political processes, as opposed to this primordial ethnic nationalism, I think we can better understand how Tamil nationalism can then be influenced by political processes, which makes it complex and multifaceted. Just because the Tamil community is losing intra-social capital doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to completely decimate Tamil national identity. But also as a result of Tamil national identity being the consequence of a political process, that process of reduction of trust can have an impact. I know I'm definitely running over time, so I'm just going to end by touching on a second intersecting piece of this analysis, which I think is also really important, which is what happens when the Tamil community becomes unable to identify oppressing structures as oppressive, or they internalize that impression. Again, taking the CSD as an example, CSD employees no longer problematize the military's role in employing them. Some of them have even told reporters in Sri Lanka, quote, "We are working with trust, respect, and love with military officers and members of other communities under a zero weapon concept." While some might recognize that their CSD is attempting to silence their voices, they've also become resigned to this fate. And there is limited dissent from within that population in the Vani to end the military's role in civilian activities. And so oppression by the state through militarization and securitization post-2009 in many ways has become the status quo in the Northeast. And its potential impact on Tamil political aspirations and engagement, while not definitive, should not be discounted. And I think when just to sort of summarize what I've said, the processes of militarization and securitization are creating in parallel mobilization of fear, reduction of kind of community social capital, and also the normalization or internalization of oppression. And now, again, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I'm not saying that because of this, there's going to be a drop-off in support for a Tamil national identity in the future, but I do think that these processes are correlative and pose a risk to how we identify and how we sort of center Tamil political aspirations. But again, these are not fatalistic phenomenon, right? Like, I've had the privilege over the last year and a half of witnessing some of the most incredible, brave protest culture throughout the Northeast, whether on issues of families that disappeared or on land. 2 weeks ago, I was with the community in Iranathivu as they got on boats and took their land back from the Navy, which was the most incredible experience. And I think one of the things that really struck me about that community, and to me was one of the main reasons they were able to do that, is unity. That community was one of the most unified Tamil communities I have met in my time in Sri Lanka. And partly because though they live in Kilinochi and Iranamaru, like the military doesn't have a significant physical presence in their community. The Navy that occupies their land, it's an island, so it's off the coast, but actually in the coastland area where they live, the military doesn't have as significant of a presence as it does in other areas. And on top of that, the community is fairly homogenous, so they all belong to the same church, and that also contributes to part of the unity. But I think, I'll just end by saying that the one factor that I also haven't touched on that I think is important as well is the diaspora. So I know Dr. Sulaharan Nataraja has written a paper on this, and I think has spoken about this yesterday as well. The fact that, the diaspora is part of the Tamil nation and shouldn't be discounted as a stakeholder. And I think, Dr. Rasaratnam has made this point where Tamil nationalism really was kind of taken up by the diaspora post-2009, and it how we frame it, how we continue to promote it or continue to use it as a framework is also very much centered right now in the diaspora. So the interactions between the diaspora and the homeland and the result of that, again, would need to be further studied. But I think as having lived here for the last 2 years, and seeing the impact that militarization and particularly securitization has had on communities' abilities to work together collectively, the breakdown in trust that's resulted, the impact that has not just on crimes committed by the security forces, but also on crimes committed within the community and the ability of communities to resolve those crimes, I think is particularly alarming. And I think it's definitely something that we all need to be taking seriously in our conversations about militarization. If we want to eventually ever get to a point where the Tamil community is free to determine their political aspirations and free to kind of develop a political framework that they want. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I unfortunately can't stick around, but I'm happy to answer any questions by email.
From the ground. I think that very important point that Darsha mentioned. One thing that how the Sri Lankan intelligence network strategically, internally and externally, dividing the Tamil community and destroying the Tamil community structurally, especially from the social aspect. So we always see from the wide aspect of the nation, but especially creating the fear among the Tamil community. What she mentioned in her words, like mobilization of fear through military surveillance. I think that's what the Sri Lankan military doing externally. And then internally, that they are creating a fear among us through how they create the mistrust among the community. That the example that she has given, especially we are in a place or in a room, a few people were there and they pass the information before they, Adayalam, before they interview. I think that as long as a community itself, I think yesterday we have discussed about, one of the weakness in our side, our own denial about our past. Likewise, here, they're creating a mistrust among community and destroying or dividing, coming together is a calculated, well-calculated strategy by the Sri Lankan state in order to stop or eliminate the existence of the Tamil nation. Thank you, Dasha, once again. And so then we will, as Dasha is, cannot continue to be with us today, but as she mentioned already that she's happy to answer any your questions or clarifications via email. So then we will go to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dasha. So I think for the next speaker, I don't need to introduce because a very familiar face and well known to many. But still I have the responsibility or obligation to introduce. So next speaker is Professor Nationhood.
Yes. Hi there. Welcome again to the Second International Conference on Tamil Nationhood and Genocide, the search for justice and the post-war rebuilding of the Tamil Nation. This is happening in Ottawa. So we have Murali Anna here. He's from Come Do It, and we would like to ask him a few questions. Thank you for coming today, first off.
My pleasure.
And first we would like to start with asking you what you feel about the conference thus far.
I think the conference has been amazing. Just the guest speakers that have come and just shed their light on the research that they've been doing for a number of years. Great perspectives, great motivation as well. I mean, of course, there's frustrations in terms of what continues to happen back home. But it's inspiring when you're in this space trying to make some changes and you see other people that are going through the same struggles, and you get an opportunity to come together, share some ideas, and hopefully get some effective solutions.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. And how do you think we can motivate youth around the world to take part in conferences such as these and work towards peace and justice for communities, including the Tamil community, the Rohingya community, and the Syrian community, and other communities around the world that are taking part in struggles just like ours?
So you want my 1-minute answer? Very difficult question, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's engagement at the end of the day, and it was nice to see so many youth, including yourself, as getting involved. So not just coming to participate, although I think that's very important, but actively getting involved in what's happening throughout the event, connecting with the speakers. I'll speak about our struggle first of all. There's a lot of people that have been my father's generation that have been involved and have been really holding the torch in terms of being active and helping out the community back home. And it's inspirational to see a lot of young people here that are continuing to do that. And, maybe we don't know all the histories, but the fact that people are coming here to learn about that, you don't want to repeat the past, right? So it's important to understand that information so we make the right decisions moving forward. In terms of how we can get more people to, more youth to connect, I think it's, up to those young people that are here to spread the word. I think it's extremely overwhelming to know what has happened to our community, this genocide that's occurred. And sometimes as a young person, you might feel, what can I do, right? But I think, the first step is to come to this event, learn about what's happening, and you'll see there's different ways that you can contribute. So don't be afraid or don't be shy about that. Just come and see what's happening. And, there's friends here that you can work with in different capacities. And, I think it's a good opportunity for our community right now, and I hope to see more people come for the next conference.
Sure. All right, thank you so much again for all your work and what you're doing with a lot of youth around the world, and we hope to see you again soon, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Pamela.
Okay, thank you. I'll see you soon.
Was it too long?
Oh no, this is perfect.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. And now. That's okay. This is better than yesterday. I got used to it. Got muscles now. That one, this has got me muscles now.
Some of the plastics.
I'm not used to this mic. I'm used to the other mic. So
yeah,
even I was like, are you
change it.
Name?
My name is Pamela.
Hi, Pamela.
Yes.
Actually, I'm going to present a paper on the topic of deprostration of LTT.
Okay.
So I just want to...
Yeah, of course. Defrustration of LTT.
Yeah, that means lifting the ban on LTT.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, this is Dr. Ira Ilambaradi. He is a senior researcher in the Department of Criminology at the University of Madras, India. His area of research is forced migration and refugee studies. He is currently working on exploring durable solutions for the Sri Lankan Tamil refugees in India. He is actively involved in the activities in support of Tamil nationhood and rebuilding the Tamil nation. He is a human rights defender and relentlessly works for Sri Lankan war victims. Thank you for coming today. I would like to first start with asking you what you feel about the conference thus far.
Vanakkam. நான் தமிழ் உறவுகளுக்கு தமிழில் எனது பதிலை கூறினால் மிகவும் வசதியாக இருக்கும் என்பதற்காக தமிழில் உங்களுக்கு பதில் இருக்க விரும்புகின்றேன். எனது நோக்கத்தை பற்றி கேட்கின்றீர்கள். எதற்காக நான் இந்த நிகழ்விலே கலந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றேன் என்றால், இன்றைய சூழ்நிலையிலே போருக்கு பின் மீண்டும் எந்த வகையிலே நாம் ஈழத்தில் நடந்த அந்த இன அழிப்பை நாம் உலக நாடுகளுக்கு முன் நிலைநிறுத்துவது, ஐக்கிய நாடுகள் சபையிலே நடந்தது ஒரு இனக்கொலைதான், இன அழிப்புதான் என்பதை அது மட்டும்தான் நமக்கு கிடைத்திருக்கும் ஒரே கடைசி வாய்ப்பாக நமது கண்முன்னே தெரிவதால் இந்த நிகழ்விலே நான் இந்தியாவிலிருந்து வந்து கலந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றேன். மேற்கொண்டு உங்களோட கேள்விகளை தொடரும்.
Okay, and நீங்க வந்து இப்ப வேலை செய்து கொண்டிருக்கீங்க. நீங்க வந்து migration and refugee studies கூட வந்து அந்த human rights defender நீங்க வேலை செய்றீங்க. நீங்க இப்ப பேப்பரும் எழுதி வச்சிருக்கீங்க about the human rights issues in Sri Lanka. நீங்க வந்து அதை பற்றி கொஞ்சம் பார்த்து சொல்றீங்களா?
உலகம் எங்கும் இருக்கும் தமிழீழ உறவுகளுக்கு நான் சில தகவல்களை பகிர்ந்து கொள்ள விரும்புகின்றேன். இந்தியாவில், அதுவும் தமிழ்நாட்டில் ஏறக்குறைய 63,000 தமிழீழ உறவுகள் தடுத்து வைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கின்றார்கள் அகதிகள் முகாமிலே, அகதிகள் என்ற பெயரிலே. ஆனால் உண்மையிலேயே இந்தியாவில் அகதிகளுக்கென்று ஒரு தனி சட்டம் இல்லை. அவர்கள் எல்லாம் வெளிநாட்டவர்களுக்குரிய அந்த ஃபாரினர்ஸ் ஆக்ட் என்ற சட்டத்தின் கீழ் தான் அவர்கள் வைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கின்றார்கள். அவர்களது நிலைமை மிகவும் பரிதாபத்திற்குரிய ஒரு நிலைமையில இருக்கின்றது. அவர்கள் எந்த மனித உரிமைகளையும் அவர்களால் பெற முடியவில்லை. இந்த அரசாங்கத்திடமிருந்து உதவிகளை பெறுகின்றார்களே தவிர உரிமைகளை பெற இயலவில்லை. அந்த வகையிலே அவர்களது உரிமைக்காகவும் மனித உரிமைக்காகவும் நாங்கள் தொடர்ந்து எங்களது ஆய்வை அதை நோக்கி நகர்த்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றோம். அவர்களுக்கும் சேர்த்து ஒரு நிரந்தர தீர்வாக அவர்கள் எல்லோரும் தமிழீழம் என்ற ஒரு தனி நாடு தமக்கு கிடைக்கும், அங்கே சுய கௌரவத்துடன் தாம் வாழலாம் என்ற கனவிலே இருந்தவர்கள் இப்பொழுது ஒரு நாடற்றவர்களாக இருக்கும் நிலையிலே அவர்களை பற்றிய எங்களது ஆய்வை மேற்கொள்கின்றோம். அவர்களது மனித உரிமைகளுக்காகவும் போராடுகின்றோம். மேலும் இந்த வகையிலே நாம் இந்திய அரசாங்கத்தின் பார்வையை மாற்ற வேண்டும். பொதுவாக உலகமெங்கு இருக்கும் தமிழீழ உறவுகள் இந்தியாவை ஒட்டுமொத்தமாக ஒரு எதிரியாக பார்க்கும் சூழல் இருக்கின்றது. நான் கூறும் அந்த வேளையிலே நான் முதலில் ஒரு தமிழனாக பார்க்கப்பட்டு பிறகு நான் ஒரு இந்தியனாக பார்க்கப்பட வேண்டும் என்று நான் நினைக்கின்றேன். ஆனால் பார்வையை வென்று முதலில் நான் இந்தியனாக பார்க்கப்பட்டு அதிலே எனது தமிழ் உணர்வுகள் அந்த கண்ணாடி வழியாக நான் பார்க்கப்படுகின்றேன். ஸோ ஆகையால் இப்போ எங்களது முயற்சி என்னவென்று இருக்கின்றது என்றால், இந்திய நாட்டின் பார்வையை மாற்ற வேண்டும். இலங்கை தமிழ் பிரச்சனையிலே அங்கு இருக்கும் அரசியல்வாதிகளுக்கும் அங்கே இருக்கின்ற அதிகாரிகளுக்கும் உண்மையிலே இந்த பிரச்சனை முழு வடிவத்தையும் புரிய வைத்து இன்றைய சூழ்நிலையில் நடந்தது ஒரு இன அழிப்பு தான் என்பதை நிறுவி இனிமேல் வரும் காலங்களில் இந்தியாவின் நிலைப்பாடு எப்படி ஆரம்ப காலத்திலே தமிழீழ உரிமைகளுக்காக இந்தியா தனது ஆதரவை கொடுத்ததோ, எப்படி அதை ஒரு தார்மீக போராட்டமாக அங்கீகரித்ததோ, அதே போன்ற நிலைமை மறுமுறையும் மனித உரிமைகள் அடிப்படையில் எழுப்பப்பட்டு அந்த முன்னெடுப்பை இந்தியா செய்ய வேண்டும், அதை மற்ற நாடுகள் பின்பற்ற வேண்டும் என்ற வகையிலே எங்களது வேலைகள் அமைந்திருக்கின்றது.
நன்றி. மற்றது இங்க உலகத்தில் இருக்கிற மாணவர் இளையோர் அமைப்புகள் இளையோர் அமைப்புகள் இருக்குது. உலகம் முழுக்க இங்கிலாந்து, கனடா, இந்தியா, US எல்லா நாடுலையும். எப்படி நாங்க எங்களோட இளையோர் அமைப்புகள் மாணவர் எல்லாரையுமே இந்த கான்ஃபரன்ஸ் இதழக்குள்ள கொண்டு வந்து எங்களை செமினாருக்கு கொண்டு வந்து பார்ட்டிசிபேட் பண்ணி அப்படி எங்களோட தமிழ் ஸ்ட்ரகிள படிச்சு அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்ட் பண்ணக்கு உங்களை கொஞ்சம் பார்த்து சொல்லுங்க.
இந்த கேள்வியை தந்தமைக்காக உங்களுக்கு நான் நன்றி கூறுகின்றேன். ஏனென்றால் நமது தார்மீக கடமைகளில் ஒன்றாக இருப்பது அடுத்த தலைமுறைக்கு நமது போராட்ட வரலாற்றை, நமது உரிமை மீட்பு போராட்டத்தை முழுமையாக புரிய வைக்க வேண்டும். அதற்கு இளைய தலைமுறை வரலாற்றை முழுமையாக ஆராய்ந்து படிக்க வேண்டும். இப்போ நாங்க இது போன்ற நிகழ்வுகளில் கலந்திருப்பதன் மூலமாக ஒன்றை உணர்த்த விரும்புகின்றோம். அதாவது நமது தமிழ் மக்கள் உலகம் முழுக்க இன்று அடுத்த தலைமுறை, படித்த தலைமுறை வந்துவிட்டது. அந்தந்த நாட்டு குடிமகன்களாக அவர்கள் இருக்கின்றார்கள். அவர்கள் இதை ஒரு அறிவியல் அடிப்படையில் இதை ஆய்வு மேற்கொள்ள வேண்டும், அறிவியல் அடிப்படையில் அணுக வேண்டும். I am requesting the next generation of Tamil community to approach the issue in a scientific way and find a durable solution for Tamil's rights and Tamil nationhood and other thing. அந்த வகையிலே முக்கியமாக எனது தலைப்பில் நான் எதை பற்றி உரையாற்ற, எதை பற்றி நான் இந்த நிகழ்விலே எனது பங்களிப்பை வழங்க இருக்கின்றேன் என்றால், இது போன்ற ஒரு தமிழ் தேசியம் என்ற நமது இலக்கிற்கு தடையாக இருப்பது போராட்ட இயக்கமான நமது தமிழீழ விடுதலை புலிகள் இயக்கம் தடை செய்யப்பட்ட ஒரு பயங்கரவாத இயக்கமாக உலக நாடுகள் அறிவித்திருக்கின்றது. அது நமது தார்மீக உரிமைகளை சட்டப்படி நாம் ஒரு பன்னாட்டு அமைப்புகளுக்கு முன் நாம் எடுத்து செல்ல நம்மால் முடியவில்லை. அந்த தடையை நீக்க நாம் ஒரு படித்த ஒரு லாபின்னு சொல்லுவாங்க, அந்த கொள்கை வகுப்பாளர்களை கொண்ட ஒரு அமைப்பை ஏற்படுத்தி எல்லா நாடுகளிலும் நாம் அது ஒரு விடுதலை போராட்டம், அதற்காக போராடியவர்கள் விடுதலை புலிகள், விடுதலை போராளிகள் என்பதை நிறுவி they are not terrorists, they are freedom fighters என்பதை நாம் நிறுவ வேண்டும். அதற்காக நாம் எல்லா வகையிலையும் நமது போராட்ட வடிவங்களை முன்னெடுத்து நாம் இலக்கை அடைய வேண்டும். அந்த தடை நீக்கப்பட்டால்தான் நமது தார்மீக உரிமைகள் பன்னாட்டு சட்டங்களின் அடிப்படையிலே ஒரு தேசிய உரிமை போராட்டமாக ஏற்றுக்கொள்ளப்படும். அதை நாம் வடிவாக நாம் கடந்த காலங்களிலே மேற்கொள்ளாததினால் இந்த சரிவை, இந்த ஒரு பின்னடைவை 2009 நாம் அடைந்திருக்கின்றோம். விடுதலை புலிகள் இயக்கத்தின் கடைசி எதிர்பார்ப்பாகவும் நோக்கமாகவும் இருந்தது எதுவென்றால், இது ஒரு மக்கள் போராட்டம், இது ஒரு விடுதலை போராட்டம், இது மக்களுக்கான போராட்டம், விடுதலைக்காக நாங்கள் போராடுகின்றோம், நாங்கள் போராளிகள், நாங்கள் ஒரு பயங்கரவாதிகள் அல்ல என்பதை பன்னாட்டில் இருக்கும் அனைத்து மனிதர்களும் மக்களும் உணர்ந்து தங்களது தார்மீக ஆதரவை வழங்கி இந்த போராட்டத்தை அவர்களது உரிமையை அமைதியான வழியிலே நடத்த வேண்டும், அதனால் ஒரு போர் நிறுத்தம் ஏற்பட வேண்டும் என்பதற்காக அவர்கள் என்னை கேட்டால் முறையாக எந்த தாக்குதலையும் கடந்த காலங்களைப் போல் செய்யாமல் முழுக்க பன்னாட்டு மக்களின் பன்னாடுகளின் international community, they are trying to bring the attention and the intervention of the international community to intervene into the war, and they want a peaceful resolution for that solution. அதுதான் அவர்களது இறுதியான நோக்கமாக இருந்தது. ஆனால் இலங்கை சிங்கள அரசாங்கத்தால் அது ஒரு முழுமையான பயங்கரவாத அமைப்பாக அறிவிக்கப்பட்டு அதற்கான பிரச்சாரம் முழுமையான அளவில் செலவிடப்பட்டு பல நாடுகளும் அதை அவர்களின் நோக்கத்தை சரியாக புரிந்து கொள்ளாமல் அவர்களை ஒரு வியாபார நோக்கிலே அணுகி அந்த சிங்கள அரசாங்கத்துக்கு, இனவெறி கொண்ட அரசாங்கத்துக்கு தங்களது தார்மீக ஆதரவை வழங்கியதன் மூலமாக இயக்கம் தனிமைப்படுத்தப்பட்டு அந்த போராட்டம் ஒரு பின்னடைவை சந்தித்தது. ஆனால் அடுத்த இளைய தலைமுறை அதை முழுமையாக புரிந்து கொண்டு அவர்கள் எங்கு விட்டார்களோ, தமிழீழ தேசிய தலைவர் தமது மாவீரர் நாள் உரையிலே குறிப்பிடுவது போல அந்த கனவை அவர் அடுத்த தலைமுறையிடம் தந்துவிட்டு போயிருக்கிறார். அதை நாம் நிறைவேற்ற வேண்டியது நமது கடமை. அதை எல்லா வகையிலும் நாம் ஒரு அறிவியல் பூர்வமாக அணுகி இன்றைய உலகமயமான ஒரு சூழலில் அதை நாம் எப்படி வென்றெடுக்க வேண்டும் என்பதுதான் எனது கோரிக்கையாகவும் வேண்டுதலாகவும் அடுத்த தலைமுறைக்கு இருக்கும்.
நன்றி. வணக்கம். Yeah, perfect, Uncle. Thank you. வேலைண்ணா என்ன இது வந்து அனலை எக்ஸ்பிரஸ் இருக்கு. ஆனால் லைக் ஆஸ்திரேலியன் ஆமாம் வேர்ல்ட் லைக் லைக் வெப்சைட்லேயே இருக்குது. எல்லா இடத்துலையும் போவாங்க. நாங்கள் கம்பெனி இருக்குது. இதில் நாங்கள் செய்யலாம். ஆமாம்
சத்தமே இல்லையா?
matching. Yeah, colors exact same. Hey, no, I'm okay. Yeah. Okay, Doctor ready.
வணக்கம் நாங்கள் இன்னைக்கு second international conference on Tamil nationhood and genocide நிற்கிறோம். நாங்கள் வந்து இப்போ டாக்டர் வரதராஜா கூப்பிட்டு வச்சிருக்கோம். டாக்டர் வரதராஜா உங்களோட ஒர்க்கை பற்றி கொஞ்சம் சொல்லுங்கள்.
வணக்கம். இன்று ஒட்டாவாவில் நடந்து கொண்டிருக்கின்ற இலங்கையினுடைய சர்வதேச மாநாட்டில் கலந்து கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். நான் இலங்கையில் யுத்தம் நடந்த பொழுது இறுதிக்கட்ட யுத்தத்தில் முடிவு நாள் வரைக்கும், அதாவது மே 15 வரைக்கும் அங்கு கடமையாற்றிருக்கின்றேன். யுத்தம் நடந்த பொழுது நான் வைத்தியராக ஆரம்பத்தில் கிழக்கு மாகாணத்தில் ஈச்சிலம்பத்து, வாகரை, கதிரவெளி போன்ற பகுதி வேலை செய்து, அதன் பின்பு முல்லைத்தீவுக்கு மக்களிடம் பேச பொழுது நான் முல்லைத்தீவு பகுதிக்கு வேலைக்கு சென்றேன். மிகவும் சொற்ப அளவிலான வைத்தியர்களும் வைத்தியசாலை ஊழியர்களும் கடமையில் செய்திருந்தார்கள். மிகவும் ஆபத்து நிறைந்த கட்டணங்களும் கூட தங்களுடைய உயிரை கூட கொடுத்தார்கள். பல நூற்றுக்கணக்கான தொண்டர்களும் ஊழியர்களும் தங்களுடைய அர்ப்பணிப்பான சேவையை வழங்கி மக்களுடைய உயிரை காப்பாற்றுவதற்கு முயற்சி செய்திருந்தார்கள். யுத்தம் இறுதி நாளடைந்த பொழுது நான் காயமடைந்து நாங்கள் என்னுடைய வைத்தியசாலை அதன் நண்பர்களும் இராணுவத்தினுடைய பகுதிக்கு சென்றோம். அதன் பின்பு எங்களை 4 மாதங்கள் 5 வைத்தியர்களை சிறப்பித்திருந்தார்கள். 4ஆம் மாடியில் 4 மாதங்கள். அதன் பின்பு 4ஆம் மாடியில் விடுதலையாகி தற்பொழுது அமெரிக்காவில் அரசியல் குடும்பமிருந்து
நன்றி உங்களோட வேலைக்கு. நீங்கள் மாணவர் இளையோர் அமைப்புகள், உலகத்தில் இருக்கிற அமைப்புகள் எல்லாருக்கும் நீங்கள் என்ன சொல்ல விரும்புகிறீங்கள்? அவங்க இந்த கான்ஃபரன்ஸில் வந்து இப்படி இன்னும் 10 வருஷத்தில் என்ன சொல்லிக்கிற ஒரு கான்ஃபரன்ஸ் வச்சுருக்காங்க. நாங்கள் எப்படி இளையோரை எல்லாரையுமே இப்படி
கான்ஃபரன்ஸுக்கு கொண்டு வந்து பார்ட்டிசிபேட் பண்ணி அங்கே ஸ்ட்ரகிள்ஸை முன்னேற்ற கொண்டு வந்து எப்படி நாங்கள் வந்து எல்லாருமே தமிழ் ஸ்ட்ரகிளை கொண்டு வரக்கு சொல்லுங்க.
ஆரம்பத்தில் எங்களுடைய தமிழ் மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனையை பார்த்தால் இந்த பிரச்சனை ஒரு 10 வருடமோ 15 வருடங்களுக்கு உட்பட்டதாக இருக்கவில்லை. கிட்டத்தட்ட 40-50 வருடங்களுக்கு முன்பாகவே இந்த தமிழ் மக்களுக்குடைய உரிய பிரச்சனை ஆரம்பமானது. அதன் ஆரம்ப கட்டத்தில் தமிழ் அரசியல் தலைவர்கள் வன்முறையற்ற விதத்தில் அகிம்சை வழியில் தமிழ் மக்களுக்குரிய பொருத்தமான தீர்வை பெற்றுக் கொடுப்பதற்காக பல ஆண்டுகளாக முயற்சி செய்தார்கள். ஆயுதமற்ற வழியில் அகிம்சை வழியில் அவர்கள் போராடினாலும் கூட இலங்கை அரசாங்கம், சிங்கள அரசாங்கம் அவர்களை ஆயுதம் கொண்டும் அடக்கும் முறை மூலம் தமிழ் மக்களுக்குரிய தீர்வை வழங்க முடியாது என்ற ஒரு கட்டத்துக்கு தமிழ் மக்களை தள்ளியிருந்தார்கள். அப்பொழுது கூட அவர்கள் ஒரு அடக்குமுறையிலான தமிழ் மக்கள் மீது ஒரு யுத்தத்தை பிரயோகப்படுத்தினாலும் ஒரு அழுத்தத்தை ஏற்படுத்தினாலும் தமிழ் அரசியல் தலைவர்கள் தொடர்ந்தும் அகிம்சை வழியிலே போராடி தமிழ் மக்களுக்கான ஒரு தீர்வை பெற்றுக் கொடுக்க முன்வந்து கொண்டிருந்தார்கள். சிங்கள அரசாங்கம் கலவரங்களை ஏற்படுத்தியும் அந்த அகிம்சை வழியான போராட்டங்களை நசுக்கியும் அப்பாவி பொதுமக்களையும் அவர்களுடைய சொத்துக்களை முடக்கியும் வீசாசார கல்வி முறை என்பதை புகுத்தி தமிழ் மாணவர்களுடைய உயர்கல்வி தொழில் வாய்ப்பு என்பதை பறித்தும் பல அட்டூழியங்களை புரிந்து கொண்டிருந்தார்கள். அதன் ஒரு கட்டத்தில் அகிம்சை வழியை தொடர்ந்து போராட முடியாத என்ற நிலைக்கு தமிழ் மக்கள் தள்ளப்பட்ட பின்பு தமிழ் இளைஞர்கள் ஆயுதம் ஏந்த வேண்டிய நிலை ஏற்பட்டது. அப்ப ஒவ்வொரு கட்டத்திலும் இளைஞர்கள் கையில இந்த தமிழ் மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனை சென்று கொண்டே இருந்தது. தொடர்ந்து அதுவும் தொடர்ச்சியாக இளைஞர்கள் ஆயுதமேந்தி ஆயுதமேந்த அமைப்புகளுடன் போராடி தமிழுடைய விடுதலை புலிகளுடன் இணைந்து தமிழ் மக்களுக்கு ஒரு விடுதலை பெற்றுக் கொடுப்பதற்காக கடுமையாக போராடி கொண்டிருந்தார்கள். பல ஆயிரக்கணக்கான இளைஞர்கள் தங்களுடைய உயிரை தியாகம் செய்து தமிழ் மக்களுக்காக போராடினார்கள். இப்பொழுது அந்த போராட்டம் முடிக்கப்பட்டதாக சொல்லப்பட்டாலும் இன்னும் இந்த தமிழ் மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனை இந்த வருஷமோ இல்ல வருஷமோ தீர்க்கப்படாது. சில ஆண்டுகள் எடுக்க 5 வருஷமோ 10 வருஷமோ செல்லக்கூடும். அப்படி செல்லுகின்ற பொழுது வருகின்ற இளம் சமுதாயத்து தான் இந்த பிரச்சனை போக வேணும். அதுல ஒரு துரதிர்ஷ்டவசமான ஒரு சம்பவம் நடக்குது என்னன்னா, இப்ப இருக்கிற இளம் சமுதாயத்துக்கு இலங்கை மக்களுடைய தமிழ் மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனை தெளிவாக தெரியாது. அப்ப இப்ப இருக்கிற நாங்கள் பாதிக்கப்பட்ட எங்களை போன்றவர்கள் அல்லது இலங்கை தமிழ் மக்களுடைய பிரச்சனையை அறிந்தவர்கள் அதை இளம் சமுதாயத்துக்கு சொல்லிக் கொடுக்க வேண்டும், கற்பிக்க வேண்டும். புத்தகங்கள், வீடியோக்கள், ஆவணங்கள் மூலம் தெரியப்படுத்தி தமிழ் மக்கள் இலங்கையில் வாழ்வதற்கு அதிகாரப்பூர்வமான வர்க்கம், எங்களுக்கு இலங்கையில் வாழ்வதற்கான சகல அதிகாரமும் இருக்குது, எங்களுக்கு தமிழ் மக்களுக்கு ஒரு நிரந்தரமான அரசியல் தீர்வு வேணும், அதற்கு தொடர்ந்து வருகின்ற இளம் சமுதாயத்தினர் பாடுபட வேண்டும் என்ற கருத்தை அவர்களுக்கு சொல்லிக் கொடுத்து கொண்டே வர வேண்டும். அதன் பின்பு நாங்கள் இல்லாத காலம் வந்தா கூட அல்ல எங்களுக்கு இது நடந்தாலும் கூட இந்த தமிழ் மக்களுக்குரிய அரசியல் தீர்வை பெற்றுக் கொடுப்பதற்கு இளைஞர்கள், மாணவர்கள் முன்வருவார்கள்.
நன்றி. உங்களோட வேலைக்கு, உங்களோட வார்த்தைக்கு மிக நன்றி. உங்களோட ஒர்க்கை நாங்கள் இன்னும் கூட பார்க்கறதுக்கு இருக்கிறோம். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.
One more question. Roshi.
Thank you for that intervention. The last point I think I have to mention with regard to Srina's presentation, but the photo that he has shown with the Tamil Sulal Nallachi with regard to the environmental protection of the Yekam, the movement. I think during the ceasefire agreement or the peace agreement time, LTT was in the process of building the nation, while the Sri Lankan government or the Sri Lankan state was in the process of strengthening their military capacity. With that remark, so I would like to introduce the next speaker. So the next topic will be Crisis in Tamil Medium Education in Sri Lanka, a review, which will be delivered by Dr. Edirveera Singham. He's most well known as a twice Olympian, when he represented Ceylon in high jump and winning gold at the Asian Games in 1958 with a new record. And today, today he will be speaking today about his extensive work with the the school system in the Tamil homeland. Thank you.
நீங்கள் கேட்ட 15 minutes நீங்கள் ஒரு 12 minutes alert பண்ணுங்க. Then I can wind up. Yeah. வணக்கம் எல்லாருக்கும். Thank you. Height. Thank you. It's an education, not Olympics. Unfortunately, when I go to Sri Lanka, or even in the north, I've been going there after 82. Before that, I go there every 2 years. After 82, I was away for a long time. I went back in 94. So I went to as a visiting lecturer to University of Jaffna in the Keynote campus. But my academic profession was never recognized by anyone. So there's a high jumper. Not only in other parts of Sri Lanka, but also in the north and east. And LTT staff, when I went there, their problem was, why is he here? That was the question. But they got used to me. But still, as a high jumper. So that tag and reputation stayed with me. So when I was appointed as consultant to the Northeast when they were together, it was in sports, not education. But I did education work too. Just a question on that. Professor Boyle referred the LTT operated a de facto administration. Rudra and I used to discuss this, but actually theirs was a de jure administration because Sri Lanka occupied the north and east. Most of you may know, but the younger generation won't know, that in 1948, when the British decided to have the Constitution and independence, we were under the occupation of the British, before that Dutch, and before that Portuguese. So British, when they left, they wanted to put us together. So in the Constitution, there was a section 29. And there was a decision by the Privy Council, Lord Denning, that we were, that section 29 was the covenant under which the Tamils and the Sinhalese joined together. Professor Peris, I'll just quote that only. Professor Peris, he was Minister of Constitutional Affairs under Chandrika. He said, published in the Daily News, a constitutional safeguard was provided for the minorities by Article 29, Section 2 of the Salisbury Constitution. It prevented Parliament from conferring benefits on the majority community and imposing disabilities on the minorities. The Privy Council in Bribery Commissioner versus Ranasinghe had ruled that Article 29.2 cannot be amended even with a two-thirds majority. It was on the basis of this safeguard that the Tamils acquiesced in the granting of independence in 1948. The covenant was broken in 1956 on the Single-Only Act. Then afterwards in 1970, when they made the Constitution in 1972, Article 29.2 was left out. And the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka that existed was also left out. The Parliament also left out because they had the Constitutional Council outside the Parliament. So the old Parliament and the old Supreme Court still exist, theoretically. So when the covenant was broken, those who came together went apart. So since 1972, Sri Lanka was occupying the territories that belonged to Ulam Tamils. So when LTT controlled both, it was a de jure government. So now it is still de jure by an occupying force in the north and east. Anyway, as for people to think about, don't put that in my time, please. Education. In 2013, when the Provincial Council was first Provincial Council, the Minister of Education, Mr. Kurukul Raja, whom I have known since '94 when he was Director of Education in Klinachi and Mullaitivu, asked me whether I would facilitate a review of the Northern education system. This is the review. It is accepted by the Ministry of Education and the Sri Lankan government and also the National Education Commission. Some of the recommendations which applies to the whole country is being implemented starting from January of this year. Now, that review has chapters on, one chapter on the whole of Sri Lanka, and the rest of the chapters were about the north. Now, going to the, you see the names of those people who are not with us anymore. Joseph Parajasingham, Sivaram, Kumar Jayalat, he was a Sinhalese Minister of Reconstruction. And then Professor Manoharan. Professor Manoharan has a book on the colonization of the East. His topic was on that one. And this is in memory of them. I appreciate all of them, and I have known them very well. Oops, wait a minute. We'll go to the next one. This is the website of the Northern Province Education. There's an English version of this book and also a Tamil version. You all can go and look at it if you want more about it. Generally speaking, just to give you an idea of the, there are 12 zones, or in other countries they'll call it school districts. And then the number of schools, there are some national schools that is funded by the central government directly, then the provincial councils. I just wanted to show you the functioning schools, 1006. The 1,098 schools were there before because of the displacement. They were not able to close some schools. Not closed, temporarily closed. Out of the schools that are existing, there are many who are only 50 students or 100 students or 200 students. There are about 50 schools like that. So one has to decide what to do with them. Here's a total number of students, 381,000, almost 82,000. In the eastern province, there are more schools and also more students. Then in the Malayalam, there are many schools. Altogether, in the Tamil medium schools, there are 3,190 Tamil medium schools in the whole country. So our concern is with them. The Sinhala medium schools are the other one. There are also some English medium schools. One of the problems we have is the whole country too. There are teacher certificates that are students after their 12 or 13 years of study, they go to 2 years of teacher education courses and then go to teach in the primary schools. In the primary schools, you have to teach, the teacher teaches all the subjects. So actually, they are not qualified to teach all subjects. So some of them are also teaching in the secondary schools. Then there's the College of Education, there's 3-year students. And the number of graduates are very small. So that's another problem nationally. This is in the Northern Province. Here again, teacher certificates in blue. 50% of them are teacher certificate. There are volunteer teachers. They don't have any qualification except they went to secondary school. 8%, those are all political appointments. Premadasa started it. Then all our people also used that opportunity to get votes. They give, where do they go? Go and teach. So it's a dumping ground for political problems. That's another problem we have to deal with. The Northern Province Council does that too. They are reluctant to get rid of that volunteer one. This is in Keynote district only. Volunteers are small there. They so call them volunteer because they are not qualified. Teacher certificate in Keynote is 73%. Now, Now, the GCE, those who are qualified to go for GCE O-level, General Certificate of Education, you can see that the percentage, Northern Province is leading. Then you will see the provincially, this is sort of nationally. Then if you go to the 99 school district or zonal directorate, and if you can look at it, I hope it is big enough. Eastern Province and Benny area, that's the rural areas of the Northern Province, are at the bottom 25 or so. And but Jaffna is on the 34th position. And Tenmarachi, within the Jaffna zone and Tenmarachi zone, they are in the 67%. All the other zones are below it. So we have a problem of inequality in opportunities for education. We wanted to improve that after the war. How can we catch up with the rest of the country and the rest of the world? So in mathematics and science, we went into e-learning. That is, we have DVDs that has all the lessons from covered by the syllabus, the curricula, and distributed to the north and trained the teachers how to use it, and also at the east that we did last year, close to both provinces, close to about 1,000 maths and science teachers who teach in the GCE O-level were trained. And then there's a website where these lessons are. Anybody can download it, students, teachers, but we have also distributed it free. Of course, it's all funded by an organization from the Silicon Valley, composed of alumni of the schools. Then eKelvi, which is an organization by Jaffna University graduates in Australia, JUGA, they take it with a small computer just loaded with all these lessons. Where there are no electricity or no internet, they can access it. It's a device, something like an iPad, but $300 or so. But they are going to areas that are no teachers, and sometimes there are teachers but not qualified. But the e-lessons it's a self-learning program. You can look at it at ekalvi.org. We help them on that professionally, but they do all the financial aspect and organization and administration part of it. Now we come to what Darsha was talking about, militarization in education. They went into CSD, means Civil Security Department. They have established 294 schools, and they have hired 558 teachers, and there are 6,000 students are enrolled in schools. Army operates it. So Army is having an education department of their own. Who is to question this. The teachers are paid 30 to 35,000, but the government's preschool teachers are paid 6,000 rupees. And these teachers are trained on other matters. Counterinsurgency used to be what the army was trained in by Annapolis in the US and other countries. Before the end of the war, there was Green Berets training in the South. There are pictures of it. When we raised this matter with them, no, they are not training them. They are training them how not to commit crimes or war crimes. Of course, we did point out to them it didn't work. I don't got teachers. So it's now, like Darsha described, I have come across that. And that's a very serious problem that we have to address you have to have, it's a Vietnam concept that US taught Army. If you go to the website, there are master's theses on counterinsurgency by armed forces people who went to train there. Their theses are there. So they have now added not counterinsurgency, it's what the US used to call a specification program. So it's very serious. It has to be addressed by those who are on the ground and those who are outside. Now, coming to the problem that I want it to be solved, the last 2 years I was asked to be a member of the General Committee on Education of the National Education Commission, which is a policy-making body. So one of the points I raised with them was that, I don't know how many of you know, somebody had talked about textbooks, curricula, on history. Now, all subjects, the whole curricula is written in Sinhalese. All textbooks, not just the history textbook, all textbooks are written in Sinhala and then translated into Tamil. Same thing with the examination department. I raised this question in '95 with the National Institute of Education, and after 2 hours of discussion how they can correct this, the Director General at that time, Udugama, who was a Minister of Education under Mrs. Bandaranaike before he was Director General, and to sum it up is that he said, exact words were, these are all political problems. So that means he cannot do anything about it as Director General. After that, in '98, I raised it, couldn't do it. But when I was member of the National Education Commission's committee, I pointed out that they are discriminating by doing this translation because much is lost on that. And more than that, you only have Tamil translators who know Sinhalese. So when I looked at their website, you can go and look at it yourself, nie.lk, found that the academic staff of the National Institute of Education, 220, who does all this curricula and textbooks and teaching materials. Out of that 220, only 20 are Tamils. When I raised this question on paper to the commission as a member, the response was the Director General herself is saying we have 400 part-time Tamil people helping us on this. The question is not part-time members or number of academic staff. Question is, you are doing it in Sinhalese and translating into Tamil. There were 2 members who supported me, who said that has to be, that should stop. Only way to stop is you appoint another 180 as Tamil academic staff to their various departments to write it in Tamil, and the Sinhalese version you write it in Sinhalese, then have a committee together to make sure they are equal. The curricula is the same, the textbook are the same. They refused to accept that recommendation. So then other recommendation was, okay, then establish another institute of Tamil medium education. That everybody said no. Now, before all this, in this book, there's a chapter that the Northern Province Council recommended to establish a Tamil Institute of Education, Tamil Medium, Institute of Tamil Medium Education. This was accepted by the Board of Ministers of the Northern Provincial Council, and it was also accepted by the governor. When the governor signs, is signing it on behalf of the cabinet. Now that was in 2015. Now, to this date, the Northern Provincial Council has not acted on it. I was asked to write a statute because you had to establish an institute by statutes, not just by somebody saying it's an institute. The statutes was translated in Tamil. It was all approved. It is with the Chief Secretary. He's waiting for the new Minister of Education to say, submit it to the Council. Only the Chief Secretary submits to the Council, as Board of Ministers and the Council. Then you can start. Thank you. So, while there is a educational discrimination, I call it institutionalized racism. We ourselves are not instituting so that we can develop our own curricula. Same, but in Tamil. So we developed this body of educators so that they are at a level they can write textbooks, write curricula, write examinations. That we don't have. We have education administrators, but we have no education professionals in the department. So they have subjugated the development of the Tamil people to that level. They are continuing to do so even when appealed. So now time is up. Chapter 4 of the Constitution is about official languages. Under that, they have established an official language commission, and it's here. A citizen or a Northern Provincial Council can appeal to the Official Language Commission to for the National Institute of Education to appoint equal number of Tamil educators in the academic positions. Our NIE and administrators, there's 0 Tamils. If the commission doesn't, within 30 days, gives the answer, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. This is about the military operator. Now, what can be done? We can appeal. The Northern Provincial can establish the Institute of Tamil Education, or they can appeal to the Commission. But for the United Diaspora can take the problem to their legislators and to the international community. Then these are legal challenges. It costs. But I have identified a non-political, I have approached, and he has agreed, a non-political, they call President's Council. So he has agreed to take the case. We are working on it. He won't charge because he's very rich. He's a citizen of Sri Lanka. I am also a citizen of Sri Lanka, not United States. So, Professor Nataraja, I'm not saying you are less than I am. We are equal. We are all Ulam Tamils. But there are costs involved. So I am filing the case. I'm not waiting for the provincial councils to do it. They won't, I know now, unless there's a new provincial council now. But maybe I will challenge them. So here is a chance to test the Chapter 4 of the Constitution, test the people and to expose them to the community how a silent discrimination is taking place against violating the Constitution. Just to sum it up, we need to establish our own institutes. Guru Bharan mentioned about parallel section. We don't need to call it parallel because parallel means you are relating to something else. I don't recognize that something else. So why do you want to call it parallel? You establish your own institution, own organizations, and operate it. In education, almost 90% of the powers are with the provincial councils. They don't exercise it. It is there. What is it that the central government does is that they make sure the curricula is the same, examination is the same, Sinhala medium or Tamil medium, and the textbooks are the same. So we have no powers to write our own textbooks that way we like. But in history, we need to ask. Just to mention to you, I was asked by the National Education Commission to be in the 60-member history curricula Tamil. I said, I'm not a historian. I know Sri Lanka history, but I don't have that discipline. Would you take 2 people from the University of Jaffna who are in that discipline. They said yes, but they had to come on this date. Unfortunately, that date is the convocation ceremony of the University of Jaffna. And Professor Patmanathan is the chancellor. They refused. I said, when you are ready to meet, you want a Tamil. There are about 60 Sinhalese historians in that committee. I was only one nominated. So I said, take these two people and we'll make sure that the history is written in the textbook the way the facts are given. And for your information, you may know it, the history is only up to 1978. After 1978, schools are not taught what the history is. We can teach that history in the schools without the permission of the national education people, or MOE. But it won't be in the O-level tests or A-level tests. Anyway, thank you very much for the extra time. I'm not limping because I'm old. I'm limping because I injured my left knee trying to play golf like a 50-year-old.
No. Please, forward. No.
Thank you, Dr. Edivirasingham, for that very important presentation. So, say it in a word in Tamil. வரலாற்றை மாற்றி அமைப்பதனூடாக ஒரு தேசத்தை இல்லாதொழிக்கும் முயற்சியில் வரலாற்று ரீதியாக ஸ்ரீலங்கா ஈடுபட்டு வந்திருக்கின்றது என்பதனுடைய சாராம்சம் அது. So, why the Sri Lankan state and the Sri Lankan military are collaborating and containing the Tamil education? I think if we revisit the history, because for the Tamil, one of the main assets for the Tamil nation's existence is education. And our education and language are interconnected. In 1956, they brought Sinhala Language Act. Through that, they targeted the Tamil language. And then in 1971, they brought the standardization in order to suppress the Tamil education emergence. And in 1974, they attacked and unleashed violence against the International Tamil Research Conference in Jaffna in 74. And then the largest public library in South Asia, Jaffna Public Library, was destroyed with over 90,000 books in 1981 May. So if we have a long history of Sri Lankan attack against the Tamil education, because more than us, maybe the enemy state know what is important for the existence of the Tamil nation. So with that remark, I would like to invite the next and last speaker of this session, Dr. Gnananethan, who will be speaking on Eelam Nation Building, an integrated framework for development of science and technology. Dr. Gnani is currently attached to the Public Health Ontario as a bioinformatics scientist and holds a status-only academic appointment with the University of Toronto. Gnani did his undergraduate degree in the University of Jaffna, his PhD from the University of Sussex, UK, and MSc in bioinformatics from the University of London. Gnani works with the many organizations promoting Tamil nationhood and strive to advance education, economy, and social empowerment of Tamil brethren in collaboration like-minded entities. Thank you.
எல்லோருக்கும் வணக்கமும் நன்றிகளும். ஒரு மணி ஆகின்றது, இன்னொரு 20 நிமிஷத்தில் சாப்பிட போகணும். So it's going to be 1 very soon, so I'll be very brief. I like to talk to 1 hour, but they won't allow me to do that. Okay. So I come from Mars, not Mars. So I eat lots of Mars chocolates when I was undergrad and postgrad. But I currently work in this Mars building. It is an intersection of university and college just in front of the Ontario Parliament. So the top 4 floors are occupied by our arm's length agency of the Canadian Ontario provincial government. Why I say Mars? Because I normally work in interfaces. I work in the interface between molecular biology and computing. And today's presentation is also going to be in an interface between an academic and an activist. So whatever I am going to present today is a synthesis. It is not my primary research. Okay. It is economy stupid. We have heard this before. Who said this? James Carville, Bill Clinton's campaign strategist. When Bill Clinton was standing for his first presidency, the economy was going bad, so the campaign was, it is economy stupid, nothing else. Have you heard this before somewhere else? Yes, our national leader has said this. சுயநிறைவான தன்னில் தானே தங்கி நிற்கும் பொருளாதார வாழ்வுடைய சமூகமாக எமது சமுதாயம் உருவாக வேண்டும் என்பதே எனது விருப்பம். What Honorable Velupilla Prabhakaran has said is, we strive for an economically self-reliant and self-sustaining society. So based on those principles, let's talk about the current economic situation and how we can improve our economic aspirations. So the current focus is on one of the boxes we are talking about genocide, crimes against humanity, justice and reparation for the victims, and we also talk about how we get these justice in international courts of justice, or we want to move towards universal jurisdiction, and the new political process, or whether we are going to have a new constitution. All of these are interrelated, and we have talked about it yesterday and few speeches this morning. On the other hand, there are 3 R's and 1 D proposal which has been proposed and being implemented to some extent in the last 9 years. Rehabilitation, resettlement, reconstruction of all the war-affected people, and the development. Now, having said that, how far we have advanced on these topics is a very big question. So after 2009, most of us from the diaspora or even from our homeland, we had been advocating and doing short-term projects. Short-term means something less than 5 years. Or slightly more than a medium-term project lasting for 10 years. So we are from 2009, we are on the 9th year, next year will be 10 years. These are very, very essential. சாப்பாடு இல்லாம ஒருத்தன் இருக்கலாம். So food is the primary most important thing in life. Without it, nothing happens. So we have to feed the people. We have to provide shelter to the people. So that is the primary most very essential thing. Multiple actors have participated in this, NGOs, international NGOs, diaspora, at various levels. And we have done many projects, all with good intentions. Right? We want to help. But there had been lack of coordination. Sometimes duplications have happened, sometimes not the real effect has happened on the ground. So these issues are there. Now, the other question we want to ask is how long we can sustain this. We have gone and given money to buy a cow or a goat. Now, goat gets some infection of viral infection and dies. We don't know anything about that, right? So we are happy saying, oh, I have bought him a goat, so the family will be okay. It's not so, right? We have built libraries. Every village councils here, every OBA has built libraries. Have you provided enough books there, right? So then the outcomes of these are very, very suboptimal, right? So what's happening because of that is a creeping disinterest from the diaspora and from the homeland. Homeland, people are not really benefiting with all this investment. And on this side, on the diaspora, there's a serious disinterest. We have provided that. Why should we worry about it? 10 years have gone. That sentiment is creeping in. Now, what does this picture tell us? There's an elephant in this room. None of us are seeing it, right? Now, I'm not a UNP card-carrying member. My slides are in green, but that doesn't mean I am associated with UNP, right? Elephant is also a symbol of UNP party, which is the current governing party, right? Okay. Or you. So Sri Lankan state, very cleverly, we have seen in the presentation this morning, is doing colonization in a very, very subtle, not overt manner. Before the revolution, before this 1983, national liberation started in a fully blown pattern, the colonization was very, very open. They will bring people, just settle it. Now it doesn't happen like that. So they are, in a subtle way, they are giving employment, they are giving this benefit, that benefit, so the people are just coming and colonizing it. So there are a few examples. So after tsunami, all the international communities have funded lots of money, billions of dollars. And I don't want to talk about previous president putting that money into his personal bank account for 2 months. That's relevant. But some of the funding has been spent on Kurunagala, which is far, far away from the coast. Right? Similarly, in currently the Navakuli area, which is the small land strip which is connecting the peninsula with the mainland, and Vaunia, south and north regions, in Mullaitivu, and in Mannar and the whole of east, the western side of Eluvankara, is being colonized in a subtle manner. Even 50,000 houses given by the Indian government, funded by the Indian government, some of the thousands are being given to the people who are not being touched by this war. And we have seen this morning that how the government is making sure that Tamil people are being in a subservient population. We are dependent on the Sri Lankan government for our day-to-day living in northern east. How they do it? They monopolize the industry. We have seen that they are running schools. Why should an army run a school? We have seen they are running hotels. Some of our brothers here go to those hotels. Our army is running a fantastic hotel on the Mullaitivu coastline. They have never been there for 30 years. My blood boils when I hear that, right? So these industries and trade are being controlled by the military occupation. And they are introducing narcotics. Have you heard about Kerala Kanjal, one of the narcotics, before 5 years ago? None of us have heard about that. Now, how come not a single person from India to Sri Lanka can take a boat and go to India or come back from India, but how come all these tons and tons of narcotics are landing on the northern coast? Who is behind this? Ava is one of the biggest youth gang or a criminal gang, or lumpans. Who created that? Ava means what in Sinhala? We have arrived. We have arrived. We are going to show you who we are. That is the meaning. We are, right? Are, right? And also, there have been regional, religious, caste issues are being rekindled again, which we haven't heard about this in the last 30 years. Now, having said that, very pessimistic situation. Do we have a vision to go against this? Yes, we do. We will have a Tamil Vision 2030. So what is that? So if we don't have a vision, what will happen? We will stay with the unitary government. We will be assimilated. By 2030, there won't be a substantial Tamil population in northern east. The current MPs or the members of parliament will be reduced to few, less than 5. How this will, so that's the issue. That's one of the options. Doing nothing, going to assimilation. Second option, striving for a federal or quasi-federal state. Or, since genocide is well established, Tamil has been undergone genocide. Yesterday I heard Professor Boyle saying, we are eligible for a separate state. We should go for that. Or, this is something which is very controversial. In Tamil we call it Pesa Porul. Are we willing to take some sort of affiliation with India to safeguard our existence in northern east? It's a very difficult question. It's a very sensitive question, but just think about it. Now, the other topic I want to touch upon is there's the political activities and political movement going on at various levels. Then there's a development discourse going on at a level. So TNA's positions is, we are talking about political process, so we won't get involved in the development process. Now, Douglas Devananda or the National Party's discourse is, we are doing development, there's no political issues. But what we are trying to do, a hybrid model, both has to travel on multiple tracks, parallel tracks. So it is not either politics or development, but both. So to do that, we have to do a paradigm change here. For the last 9 years, our diaspora has been mostly reactive to things happening on the ground. When we see a news, we react. We are not proactive. So unless we change our stand from reactive to proactive, we don't have a long-term vision. Now, having said that, do we have to start with an empty blank canvas? No. We already have a good foundation. For 20-odd years, we had a de facto or de jure state, and we administrated that. We had multiple departments. So let's go back and look for that. So in 1997, this 109 pages document was created by Tamilulam Economic Developmental Organization called TDOR. This is still available in Google Drive. All of you can freely download it, read through that, and it's in Tamil. Okay, so I will give you some brief slides on that. So that's the content page. What it talks about is major cities of Tamilulam, roads and railways and airports, electricity, Tamilulam communication, water supply and drainage part 1 and 2, and irrigation and water management, land use in Tamilulam, industries of Tamilulam. Mostly covered everything, whatever developmental aspects we have talked about yesterday and today. So, to briefly put it in a sort of a pyramid, so land. Professor Sri Skandra has talked about land issues. Water, secondary most important resource for us. Unless we find a way to have a good water management system, we'll be in big trouble. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not an expert on that. Infrastructure, Professor Iskandaraja talked about how the roads are being built to bifurcate or trifurcate our land. Then the other issue, other economic development is power, electricity, and telecommunication. On top of that only you can build industries. So you have to think through this pyramid. You have to have land, you have to have water, you have to have infrastructure, you have to have power, telecommunication, then you build the industries. So, from this Tito book, there had been 20 different districts divided, and they have also shown roads, railways, and airports here. You can download it and see. They have talked about marine transport and harbors. They have talked about power generations. They have talked about telecommunications and where the industrial centers should come. And also, they looked at what are the primary most priority areas in industries. Now, that's fine. From where we are going to go. So, Tamil Vision 2020, we have to aim for, within the next 11 years, at least 2 companies which are capable of generating $1 billion. And 100 companies, 20 companies with 100 million, 300 with 10. So the effort is, within the next 3 years, the diaspora all over the world, let's try to make 100 different companies at least $1 million each worth. Right? I know some of them will not work, some of them will fail. Whatever works, we'll build. Okay. Now, to do that, we have to do a few things. We need a comprehensive need assessment. We don't have a need assessment even after 2009. Nothing happened. Then define the achievable things. We had to develop a think tank. We had to partner with homeland, diaspora, small, medium industries, multinational corporations, state and non-state actors. And we had to organize sectorial expert committees. Entrepreneurial startup mindset is important. And agile, building fast and failing fast mechanisms, that mindset is important. We have to aim for knowledge economy. We have to aim for resource accumulation. And we have to build brands and IP generation. Okay. So let's talk about some priority sectors. Energy. We will look at solar and wind integrated hybrid model. So Canadian government is now going into carbon cap and trade system. So that's very useful to build these things, build these solar wind power, and then write off some of the expenses. We can go for biofuel. In the agri industries, some of my friends are working on making some of these high protein, high nutritive values agri industry products. And we have very good wine grapevine cultivation in the north. We can do branded wines, which will be famous as Bordeaux wines one day. And we can go for enzymes and secondary metabolites. On computing, we have thousands of our people doing ITs and computer science. We can go for Bangalore-style IT services. And in that, we can go into new technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. I can't talk about it now because time is of a constraint. And pharmaceuticals, if you look at in Toronto, we have hundreds of our brothers and sisters who are working in pharmaceuticals. Right? Are we doing any entrepreneurship? No. So let's do something there. And on the genomic side, one of these emerging fields, on the medical sciences, in UK alone, we have got 8,000 medically qualified Tamil doctors. How many entrepreneurship, how many medical businesses have come out of it? On accounting and back office, in CRA here, probably we see hundreds of Tamil accountants working on that. And precision engineering, manufacturing, and one of the last important fact is shipbuilding. We built, for Sea Tigers built their ships, stealth ships, very high quality stealth ships, equivalent to what US Navy was building. Now we had the technology. Where is it gone now? Okay. Now that's fine. This is one of the projects I am doing currently, sequencing Palmyra, very close to my heart. And we are doing a whole genome sequencing. If any kids or any younger generation is interested, talk to me. And I have a job back. any of you know a MSc who wants to do an MSc in computer science with U of T, who will do in the interface between computing and biology, please contact me. My address is there. So now, to finalize this, great minds may not think alike, right? But we like each other's company. A brilliant idea in isolation is not enough to create a real breakthrough. To do that, Adamban Kodiyum Chirandal Mudukku. Nandri.
தமிழீழம் கனவாகி இருந்த தேசமல்ல, அது கருவாகி வாழ்ந்த தேசம், வாழ்ந்து கொண்டிருக்கும் தேசம் என்பதை எடுத்து கூறியமைக்கு நன்றி. Thank you, Dr. Gnani, for your wonderful and needful presentation. I think the very important points, 3 points, of course, most of the important points that most of you have already noticed, but I would like to mention the 3 points that post-2009, the Tamil diaspora, or as a whole, the Tamil nation, do we had any comprehensive need assessment about either economic development or even what happened to during the war, about casualties or disappearance or anything like documenting and archiving, where we failed or still we have time to do it. And for that purpose, we need the comprehensive need assessment. Second point, be proactive rather than reactive. It's a very important part if you need to set an agenda for our nation and a long-term vision. So I think with that remark, I would like to thank all the speakers, and we have a few minutes, unfortunately, because we don't want to fight against with your hunger. So I think with that, we will go, or we will give around 3 to 5 minutes, and we will take 3 minutes? Okay, 3 minutes, and we already have 2 questions, burning questions. So first one from Professor Manivannan. Thank you.